Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the IBME UBU show. I'm your host, Antoine Valentone, and today I'm joined by our guest, Dr. Robyn Short. Dr. Short is the founder and president of Workplace Peace Institute. She's also an adjunct professor at Southern Methodist University, where she earned her doctoral in liberal studies and also a master's in conflict management and dispute resolution. And I believe you're also working as a conflict trainer, resolution mediator. Did I miss anything?
That probably encompasses just about everything.
Okay, wonderful. Is there anything that you wanted to add that you think would be interesting for the viewers to know about you?
Maybe dog mommy and avid nature lover.
Oh, nice. Okay, what kind of dogs? That's important.
2 Irish setters. They are actually laying down right here. I'm hoping that they stay very quiet. We have a red and white Irish setter. His name is Calvin, and a red Irish setter, and his name is Hobbs.
Nice, nice. That's beautiful. And they're welcome to join at any time if you want to get them on camera. and my wife and I, we have a French bulldog named Petunia, so she might make a guest appearance later. We'll see. So I'm so excited to be talking today and super grateful that you are willing to carve out some time out of your busy schedule to talk with me. I love to have conversations with people like you to just learn from you and your experience. And I'm really just fascinated about your areas of expertise. So obviously, again, my primary interest, I see things through the lens of leadership, both at the sort of one-on-one level, but also at the organizational level. What can we do as leaders to create a culture, an environment where everyone within the organization can thrive and be at their best? So when I was, doing my homework on you and sort of researching you and your organization, I immediately saw a lot of alignment and things that I think we could maybe dig into more. So can we start there with the Workplace Peace Institute? And again, maybe just begin by talking about it, the vision for it, because I understand, again, you're not just the CEO, but you're the founder and president, correct?
Yes. So Workplace Peace Institute, I started the company in 2020, and it really is the result of me having worked as an individual practitioner in the field of conflict management, dispute resolution, and primarily as a mediator. I spent the first half of my career in marketing communications. I had a small marketing communications company. And as the company itself was growing and I was leading teams and more sophisticated client negotiations and contract negotiations, I began to realize that conflict and human dynamics was where I was spending most of my time. And I went back to school to really just upskill in that, to learn how to be a better leader and how to support my teams and my clients and all of this in just navigating the messiness of human behavior, which seemed to be a significant portion of my job, which kind of surprised me when I got into those leadership roles. And so I went and got my master's in conflict management, dispute resolution, with the intention of just professional development and some personal curiosity, but I really found a passion for it. I was also getting a little burnt out on owning a business. So I decided that I was going to stay small, work as an independent consultant. I didn't even have a name for my company. It was just robynshort.com, and do mediation and conflict resolution. So as I was working in that field for several years, what I began to find, almost without any exception, is that every conflict that I was invited into to support in terms of facilitation or mediation was really rooted in something that wasn't functioning well inside the organization. And the only way that these systemic dysfunctions could manifest was through the human. That's how we end up seeing it. So as a mediator, I could support these individuals in navigating this particular conflict. But I was watching that it didn't stop anybody from leaving the company. It didn't stop any of the dysfunction that was happening. It didn't do anything to go upstream, get to the source of the problem, and really create a workplace culture where people could thrive, where people weren't getting into these really destructive conflicts. Also, by the time that you call in a workplace mediator, the train's gone pretty far off the rails. Very few people are real proactive about conflict. So I began to get frustrated because I'm a systems thinker, and I think of myself really kind of like as a holistic practitioner. I want the whole body to get well, not just treating symptoms. So I actually went back to school, got my PhD in organization systems design, with a lens on looking at systems through the lens of peace building, and then started Workplace Peace Institute with the purpose of supporting organizational leaders in really creating a system that supports human dignity. And this isn't with the intention that we won't get into conflict, because wherever humans gather, there shall be conflict, but to help us navigate conflict without doing harm, and therefore be able to really reap all of the benefits that conflict actually brings to the human condition. So we started the company in 2020, and I started thinking about it in the fall of 2019. And I remember thinking to myself, this is probably going to be a hard sell. I don't know that people are really going to be looking for this type of work. But then by the time I launched the company, the world was on fire, and it made all the sense in the world.
Right. So this is very, very interesting to me, because if I understood you correctly, it sounds like when you were brought into these situations, the theme that maybe was consistent in many of the cases was not necessarily an individual or two that maybe personally were having maybe issues that were leading to this conflict, but you're saying it was more so a byproduct of a dysfunctional or unhealthy organization, and that you wanted to address those root cause issues versus, again, sort of these symptoms. Did I hear that right?
That's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me, because as a leader, I do believe, again, in creating a culture, an environment where people thrive. But the flavor that I've been looking at it more has been, how do we just get everybody performing as far as achieving their metrics, their objectives, their targets, their OKRs, etc. It wasn't so much, hey, how do we, again, minimize or avoid conflict? So this is interesting, and gives me something new to think about. So would you say maybe this is one level, maybe even deeper down the organizational health rabbit hole, potentially, where in addition to missing targets or not able to achieve objectives, then you could have, again, just issues between individuals that leads to conflict. Thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think that what I often say is that 20th century thinking isn't going to solve 21st century problems. And the world has changed. And I think I began to really observe and experience how people were really changing probably in 2015-ish, that we weren't behaving the same way in the workplace as we used to, and bringing the same traditional approaches to leadership isn't working. It isn't working, and it's actually creating bigger divides as it relates to how people are showing up in the workplace. And I think that that is because it's very multifaceted. So it's not because of one single thing, but one element is emerging workforces. So if you think about young millennials and Gen Z, they are the most educated individuals coming into the workplace in human history. In terms of formal education, the vast majority of them have an undergraduate degree. And I don't know what the statistics are, but the vast majority of those also have a master's degree. When you and I went to college, we went to college and people asked us, what are you studying and what are you going to do with that? Now, first week of an undergrad being in school, people are asking them the question, where are you going for graduate school and what are you getting your master's in? So there's this expectation now that everybody has a master's degree, and many of them do. They're working really hard in high school. They're working really hard in undergraduate. They go straight into graduate programs, and they're coming into the workplace at 24, 25 years old. And for many people, it's the first job they've ever had. Working with and for people who are Gen X and boomers, who very often started working honestly around the age of 12, right? The minute somebody would give you a buck, you started exchanging your time for money. And we worked all the way through all of these experiences. So that by the time we got into a professional work environment, we had 10 years of work history under our belt. We knew how these dynamics happened. And around 2015, I think that began to shift, that we began to have a workforce that was less experienced in terms of just actual job experience, but much more educated in terms of formal education. And so their expectations around what they experienced in the workplace is very connected to their identity, to their expectations of how they see themselves in the world and how they see the world and how they see responsibilities of organizations as it relates to solving complex world problems in a way that we didn't have before. And so therefore, this top-down leadership approach that kind of resembles old school parenting, do this because I am in a position of authority and I am telling you to do this, it doesn't work. And it's extremely disorienting for Gen X and boomers who have been in the workplace, for decades, and that has been working and it isn't working anymore. And it's very disorienting for young workers who are coming into the workplace, having had a lot of agency in their lives. And this generation that's coming into the workplace, not only are they the most educated in human history, but they were raised by the most educated parent in human history. So the parenting was really different. There was a lot of negotiation around how a person experienced themselves in the world. So as they are now coming into the workplace, there's a lot of conflict that's happening because the workplace hasn't caught up to how humans are actually evolving. And that's what I was seeing in mediations that I was working with, is that the system, so we use the word dysfunction because I think it's a word that people understand. It's only dysfunctional because a paradigm shift has happened and it no longer works. So it used to be functional, but there's been a shift in human expectations. And so it just doesn't work anymore and it's become dysfunctional.
Got it. Makes sense. So if I understood you correctly, a lot of this stems from the gap in the current leadership within a lot of these organizations and the emerging workforce and the difference in styles. So if that's correct, then is it your organization's task then to help these leaders adapt and learn new methods and strategies to help, again, communicate more in a way that is better sort of understood to, again, these emerging workforce? Yes?
Yes, and that I want to layer this other piece on. In addition to all of these changes that I just talked about, what's also happening in the world is the world itself has gotten
Yeah.
more complex. Climate change, extraordinary political violence and political adversity. The racial reckoning that is happening across America that is, long overdue and very necessary. There's a lot of gun violence. There's a lot that's happening in the world that is affecting how people perceive their sense of safety in the world. And we don't, it's so obvious, and yet we don't seem to really get it. I cannot separate what's happening in the world and what's happening in my workplace. What's happening in the world influences my internal world, and I bring my internal world with me into the workplace. And we have a lot of traumatized people. We have a lot of highly stressed people. We have more mental health issues than we have ever had in human history. And all of this is affecting how we show up. And I think, and so I think there's this other element that people who have been in leadership positions for a long time have to address or have to acknowledge that humans aren't the same. And then you think about like having gone through the pandemic, surely none of us are the same people we were, but our workplaces, there was this little minute where our workplaces said, gosh, we're all going through something. Let's shift. And I thought there was this opening to where we were going to be more human centric. But once we all figured out how technology worked, we just got back to the old way of doing things, just on Zoom. So with all of that, yes, it's my organization's goal to really support leaders in understanding that we need to be more humans in the workplace. And what does that really look like? What does it really look like to be human-centric in our leadership approach? And why does it matter? And what can we expect to see when we actually begin to lean into dignity in the workplace? And how will that shift all those metrics that you're talking about? They actually get better.
So wholeheartedly agree. There are definitely factors that affect us on our daily lives, both in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And you mentioned a lot of those things. And consciously, I think the best leaders would hopefully have an awareness of those things and try to offer, again, some sort of, if nothing else, empathy and understanding and an opportunity to at least acknowledge these are real issues, and that while this is a business, we are trying to achieve our goals, we do have to be aware that at the end of the day, we're all human and things happen, and that sometimes we need help to get through those things. And certainly COVID was something that I think impacted us all in so many ways. We've heard the expression, old habits die hard. I assume that you've probably run into some issues where you begin working with an organization, you encounter some resistance from leadership. So I'm just wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit of when that happens, how do you handle it? And just curious, is there a difference when someone reaches out to you and brings you in versus maybe you've reached out to them and suggested that this is something they should consider?
Yes. So old habits do die hard. And when we think about our target audience, we say that our ideal customer is a progressive-minded CEO who recognizes that things aren't working and can't figure out why, and intends to stay with the organization long enough to usher in change. That's a pretty niche person, right? So there are, and I would say that I have a general belief it's probably not a large publicly held company, because my observation those CEOs aren't sticking around long enough to usher in big change. There's also more complexities to it than just that. That makes a publicly traded company not really our ideal customer. So there are a lot of organizations that are never going to work with us. And I think it's really like you could say it's as simple as having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. There is a good portion of senior leaders who are very certain that they are doing it the right thing, the right way. The problem isn't me, the problem is them. And people just need to work harder and etc. They're never going to be our customer. So our customer is definitely the sort of person who is paying attention to the world and is recognizing a shift has happened. I don't understand it, but I believe it's real. And I'm willing to commit to what it takes to do change work, because organizational change work is going to take you minimum 12 months. I have a customer that I'm on an 8-year strategic plan with. So the larger the organization and the longer the organization has been, in business, the more complex and longer the change is going to take. So most companies aren't our business, aren't our customer, but when we fit into that little niche that is our ideal customer, they stay with us for a long time.
Interesting. And so you're saying even when you're brought in, is the entire leadership team, I'm assuming you work with the entire leadership team, everyone is sort of on board, they're willing to move forward, assuming you sort of validated or you've confirmed they're in that ideal profile? Because go ahead, sorry.
Yes, where we have had, so our customers is, I would say, two categories. One is what I just described. The other is we have an online leadership training. We have an online leadership academy, and I'm really interested in emerging leaders participating in those courses, because that is like mindset shaping instead of mindset shifting. So that is another customer that we're interested in. So when I have worked with organizations, I will say, right, my business started in 2020. So during the pandemic is when I was building my business. During the pandemic is when a lot of organizations were realizing, oh my gosh, things are not working and we need help. What help looks like in the world we're living in is creating systems where justice exists, right? There's been a lot of injustice, and people's tolerance to injustice has gotten pretty low. So what did happen often is a leadership team would bring me in. So CEO and team would bring me in. This work takes a long time. So 6 months, 8 months down the road, that leadership team has evolved some. There's been rotating out of someone, new positions being filled. And so it's not the same core group of people 6 months down the road that originally hired me. And where things have sometimes not been successful is when this new group doesn't have total buy-in. And the CEO doesn't have the depth of conviction to ensure that the buy-in happened in that kind of recruiting interviewing process, because it's hard work.
Indeed. And you mentioned the amount of time. You said one of your clients, an 8-year program. Do you map that out in advance, or how do you end up at 8 years?
Yes. So we are very data driven. So we start every culture change process with ideally with an online survey that the whole organization would take, and then also a culture audit process, which is qualitative data collecting, and we'll interview a portion of the employees, and then that data is going to inform a theory of change plan. And that theory of change plan is where we build the strategy, and then we redeploy the assessment year over year to actually track to make sure that we are moving in the direction that we intended to, and to make any course corrections along the way.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So I'm familiar with employee satisfaction surveys, something that we, in many of the organizations that I've worked in. And I'm just curious. My perception is that there's oftentimes a hesitancy for employees to respond at all, or if they do, be 100% honest, because even though it's anonymous, they're afraid that it's not really, and anything they say will be used against them. So any thoughts on sort of the accuracy of these, how pervasive do you think that situation is, or do you think that for the most part people are being honest?
Oh, I love that question. No, you can't just trust for the most part that people are being honest. So I believe our approach is very much about gathering wisdom in the room. So we work with we must have executive buy-in, but we spend a great deal of time working with the people, the employees, the staff. And so my ability to build trust with them on the front end before we ever send out any assessments is really critical, and that they trust that I will be a good steward of their voice, both in terms of that they trust that I'm not going to expose them anyway, but also that they trust that they're not going to be wasting their time with me.
Right.
So
that's another reason.
I really put right. Yeah, we've taken all these assessments before. We tell you what we really think, and then we never hear anything from it. Yeah. So my process is designed to be very transparent. I come back to the organization with every step of the way, making sure that they know, here is what you told me, here is what we're going to do next. And then we design processes where anyone who wants to be a part of the strategic planning is invited into that. So I will invite people into the process to ensure that our strategic planning process, or the theory of change process, includes people from all aspects of the organization, but also that it's diverse at every level of diversity, and that it's including people at all levels of the organizational hierarchy, so that we are really truly sourcing the wisdom that lives inside the organization, but also so that we are ensuring that we're including people who have a lot of social capital in the organization that can be champions of the work. So if someone has a question, they can actually go to someone they trust in the organization and get information. They don't have to go to a leader. They don't have to come to me. They can, but they also know that they have peers who are advocating for the work. So we have a lot of measures that we put in place to really ensure that this is a trustworthy and transparent process.
Now, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier about how some of the leaders that have been in the workforce for a while practice more of an authoritative leadership style, where their expectation is, I'm the boss, I have authority over you, therefore you must do what I say. And again, that is, I don't believe that's an effective leadership style. There's a better way, maybe more inspirational or visionary, what's often referred to as servant leadership. So I'm just curious, again, that's a big shift, and it took me personally years to get there through a lot of experience and making mistakes, frankly. but it was a journey that I had to go through. So I'm just wondering, again, when you meet folks that maybe still have that authoritative mindset, how do you get them to begin to think differently and at least begin that journey? Because that's half the battle, just getting them to agree that maybe their way isn't the right way, and that there's the need to change, and there has to be a willingness on their part to open to that. Any thoughts on that?
I do have thoughts on that. Yeah. So, I do a lot of free webinars, do a lot of workshops, I do a lot of speaking at conferences, and people will come to me and ask this question. Unless that leader is coming to me saying, there's a problem and I don't understand how to solve for it, and I'm willing to do my own growth to get there, I honestly don't waste my time. Where I will then spend my time is with so you have all levels of leadership, where most people experience a lot of frustration is that their director level leader, right, their manager is the manager experiences frustration because the senior leader is this old school way of being, and they see the destructive impact of that, and they're like, how do I get my leader to change? And my answer is, you don't. You simply be the leader that your team needs you to be, which means that you might be a buffer, and that's not very fun for you. And there's things that you can do to learn to manage up that will reduce the discomfort that comes with being a buffer. But if you think you're going to change this person, you're not. But what you can change is you. Be the leader the people who report to you need you to be. And then guess what? What you're also doing is creating a ripple effect. You're creating a workforce that isn't going to mirror the toxic behavior. They're going to mirror the behavior that you're presenting for them. That's the piece that you can control. It's the only piece that you can control. So I have learned to not waste my time with the CEOs and the senior leaders who are operating that way until they come to me for coaching, or until they come for me for support in some way, because they're not going to change. I'm sure it's the exact conversations that doctors have with each other when they ask about how do we get our patients to lose weight. Well, they're going to lose weight when they're ready to lose weight. And that might be never.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that. My wife and I, we have two sons, and my oldest is 15. And ever since he was little, we used to tell him, his name's Christian. We used to say, Christian, remember there's 3 rules. Number 1, mommy and daddy love you. Number 2, mommy and daddy are here to help you. Number 3, we can't help you unless you want to be helped. So it's interesting, the parallels there, obviously, in personal lives and workplace. You're still dealing with human beings, and in both cases, you still need people to meet you halfway. I wanted to segue a little bit. And I'm just fascinated about the whole conflict resolution and mediator work, dispute resolution. So I first learned about this during one of my Pepperdine classes, where it was led by Dr. Betty Schneider, who introduced me to you. And there's 2 things that I remember for that class that just stood out at me. I wanted to just touch upon with you and get your thoughts. I had never heard of Karpman's drama triangle before, and I was fascinated by it, and the whole concept of victim and hero. And so I was just wondering, can you just sort of share your thoughts and sort of maybe expand on those that might have been like me, not the longer didn't know anything about it, and how you have to maybe identify who's who in any conflict?
Yeah. So I don't don't buy into that concept wholly as a framework for conflict resolution. But what I will say is that what I believe to the core of my being is that as humans, we are needs-seeking creatures. Everything we do, we're out there trying to get a need met. And those needs are my need for belonging, for justice, for fulfillment, for esteem, for participation, for cultural security, all these things, right? Everything we do, we are attempting to get those needs met.
Yeah.
As young people in the world, right, like birth to 7 years old, we got those needs met in very specific identities. And so for some of us, showing up as the hero was a way for us to get these needs met. For some of us, showing up as the victim was a way for us to get these needs met. I feel confident my stepson is never going to see this video, so I will share this story. When he was 2 years old, his mother, I am sure doing the absolute very best that she could, would put him in his snowsuit as a toddler and lay him down on the ground. And then he'd be like a little turtle. He couldn't get up. And it was her way of putting him into a place that he was safe. He wasn't going to get into any harm. So she could probably like go take a shower or something, or, do the things she needed to do, knowing her little toddler that was into everything was going to be safe. But what I believe happened is it instilled in him, I cannot get my needs met until someone comes to rescue me, because that was actually true. He couldn't get up off his back until someone came and rescued him. And it embedded in him a victim identity. And his whole life, he has gotten his basic human needs met by being wounded, by not being enough, by not being able to like do it himself. He kind of like lacked agency. So I look at the victim and the narrative, the drama triangle, through the lens of how have these particular pieces served you in getting your needs met, and how brilliant was that they did, and now why is that not working anymore? And what new ways of thinking are you going to have to learn in order to continue to get your needs met in a pro-social way?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. And for what it's worth, as a parent, I feel awful for your stepson that he had to go through that. I imagine the how a 2-year-old may have felt, that helplessness, not being able to get up. I'm assuming it's quite traumatic. And certainly in life, we know that there are, in fact, real victims, people that are victimized. But to your point, regarding as humans, we are trying to have our needs met. It's a perfect segue, because the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was something, again, that I heard for the first time during that class with Dr. Schneider, was a complaint is a confession of an interest that needs to be met. So you mentioned, so for things like justice, the need for justice or safety or validation. So prior to that class in my master's program in management and leadership, I spent a lot of time learning about the hierarchy of needs. And that essentially and I applied it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I applied it to the workplace, and I thought, as a leader, if I can ensure that I'm checking as many of the boxes as I can for my team and the people within my organization, that everyone, again, will sort of perform better and be, at sort of like their optimal state. So I saw some parallels there, again, as far as, okay, if I acknowledge that we have humans, we're all human, including myself, And if I'm trying to achieve results, produce, the outcomes, what can I do as a leader to again create this culture, this environment where everyone's needs are being met? That to me is what the ideal sort of environment is. Nobody's worried about, their paycheck. Nobody's worried about, is the lights going to turn on or off? Do I have food? Am I safe at night? Do I have to worry? These types of things. So it's interesting. I think it's a perfect way to sort of bring us back to where we started, and ultimately, again, as you talked about, your mission with Workplace Peace Institute is really, again, creating this culture environment where people do feel like their needs are being met, so that they can be at their best, which I think is something we should all strive for as leaders. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on these subjects, and I've learned a lot from the conversation. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you thought would be important for the listeners to know or to consider going forward?
Well, I would like to share a story about what you just talked about to kind of make it real for people about how every complaint is a request for an interest to be met, because that is really, it is so true, and it's extremely difficult work. People complain because they don't know how to ask for what they want. They don't have the language for it. They might not have the courage for it. They might not understand that that's what it really is. So I had a team inside of an organization with a CEO that was never going to be my customer, right? That CEO that's never going to change. And I was the leader, that middle manager person who could be the buffer, and was leading this extremely, my team was amazing inside this box, this just bubble of toxic stuff. And I had this one employee who was the smartest person, hands down, that I have ever had the opportunity to work with. She was the smartest person in every room. And I always was just like, she can solve the problem. I know she can. The space that we were in, I am confident a fire marshal would have shut us down. I am certain there were more bodies in that building than was probably legal. And it was a difficult place to work in because we were all just sort of jammed in. It was even we didn't even have cubicles. We were just in tables with each other. And so I would always, whenever I was interviewing someone, I would walk them into the space where they're going to be working to make sure they knew, this is really where you're going to be working. Can you work in here? So she takes the job and pretty quickly starts complaining about needing an office. There was no office, and she's the smartest person I have ever worked with. So I know she knows there's no office. And it was wearing me down. And I finally thought, what is this really about? She knows there's not an office. And then I realized she knows she's the smartest person in the room too. And not in an arrogant way, in a truthful way. And offices represent that. If I have an office, it's status. It represents the status. And so I realized this complaint for an office was her saying, I need the status that is associated with how I perceive myself in the world, which is I'm smarter than everybody in that room. And so I went to my CEO and I said, you know what? I need to give her a promotion, and I need to give her a title that represents her status. And that was it. That's it. It was not that much more money. It was a title that represented the truth of who she was. And with it also came some mentoring responsibilities. And she never had another conversation about the office. And so she didn't know how to ask me for that. I'm not sure she knew that's what it really was. But as the leader, I had to get really curious and be like, what is this complaint really about?
Yeah.
And it's hard, but it's so worth the work.
Sure. Yeah, and that's really credit to you and your leadership style, that you had the wherewithal and the patience to sort of figure that out and and do something about it. So it sounds like you helped address the issue, and you have now, or you had an employee that was able to produce again and be not burdened with this unfulfilled need. Yes.
Yes, but also as the leader, I knew I was going to lose her, and that was going to harm the business, right? So it's like you have a responsibility to the health of the organization and the health of the employee, and to find a way to bring that together.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Really, again, I think there's a lot of maybe managers out there or leaders that maybe aren't as evolved in their thinking, that would have just taken this as a nuisance, and that they should just focus on the work regardless. So really a great story to share, and very inspirational, I think, for all of us to consider when faced with these types of situations. Dr. Short, again, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. Do you want to share any info as far as how or where people can get a hold of you or your organization if they want to learn more?
Sure, thank you. Yes, our website is workplacepeaceinstitute.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, and we have a lot of resources on the website, articles, webinars, free events that people can participate in. We also actually have a conflict in the workplace survey that is going to be open through the end of this month, February. So we'd love for people to come and take the survey as well.
That's wonderful. I'll make sure to add links to everything you mentioned in the comments section of the video once it's posted. So again, Dr. Short, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.